Well, good morning, folks, or good afternoon, whenever you're watching this. Thanks again for joining the increasing number of people who are turning into Stockwell day-to-day news. I really appreciate that. And we look at the news from a behind-the-scenes point of view. We stay away from the mainstream media, and the line that they usually like to tout, and we give you some of the insights behind what's happening in the news. Thanks for tuning in. We're still on the road, as you can see, back to our regular studio tomorrow. So we're seeing in the news, if you're watching from outside of Canada, there's a gap that is being reduced, that is being narrowed, the gap between the leading Liberals, who form a minority government, and the Conservatives, who are challenging, of course, at all times. And they are closing the gap, and mainstream media seems to be scratching their heads and wondering, how can this possibly be? Because at every turn, mainstream media refuses to put the Conservative leader, Pierre Poilievre, into any kind of a positive light. It's always negative. Problem is, his message seems to be getting through. He's talking about affordability. He's pointing out the fact that when you run a government by just increasing debt and deficit and increasing spending, that usually is going to lead to more taxes, which is going to increase the problems relative to standard of living. So he keeps hitting on these issues, and then the Conservative leader, Poilievre, he keeps hitting on issues also on the social side, the very real problem that we have in Canada, as in the US, with the so-called turnstile approach to serious violent crime, where they just keep circulating through back on the streets and out there hurting people. These are the types of things. Immigration, of course, Conservatives very positive on legal immigration, not on illegal immigration. And we see again this week the Liberals kicking and screaming, being dragged all the way into Parliament to finally outlaw and name a terrorist group, the Bishnoi Gang, following months and months, if not years, of protest from the Liberals on that. So these are the Conservative points that are being hit, and the leader of the Liberal Party, Mr. Carney, is not hitting those points, and mainstream media is very concerned, very upset that Mr. Carney is not listening to them, and so we continue to see problems there, but it's showing up in the polls as that gap continues to narrow. There was a disappointing story out today in Canada. As you know, if you're viewing from outside of Canada, there are long-standing issues related to truth and reconciliation and our First Nations people and all of those related items. And kind of a disturbing interview today with somebody whose father was certainly a leader in the Truth and Reconciliation movement, and the gentleman who is quoted today, University of Manitoba professor. And what he has been saying is, we have now, his father was Murray Sinclair, a leader on the Truth and Reconciliation front. And though we may have disagreed at times with Mr. Sinclair, then clearly there were issues where he was taking a positive note and thought, by working on these problems, we can bring people together. His son, University of Manitoba professor, has taken a little different tack. He says it's going to be at least 150 years till we resolve the issues related to First Nations and treatment of First Nations and truth and reconciliation. That's a pretty depressing message to be casting on either First Nations people or non-Indigenous people. 150 years, maybe, it's going to take to fix the problem. We've got problems, there's issues there, but when you say human beings can't come to resolution on these for another 150 years, that just creates a sense of desperation, a sense that nothing can work, a sense that there's no way ahead. And also in bringing that criticism, the other thing that he said was that the eight prime ministers that he has worked with, he characterizes them as being cruel and harmful. Now, this is, when you're looking at political debate and you're looking at ways in which you can reduce some of the rancor and some of the bad feeling and negative feeling that goes on, to say that he doesn't just say eight prime ministers. Sorry for the noise in the background there. We're not in our regular studio here. Hopefully that'll be an end to it. But he's basically saying all. He used the word all. All Canadian prime ministers were cruel and harmful. Listen, prime ministers can come up with policies that don't work, even that wind up hurting people. But to say that, I don't know how you're going to establish truth and reconciliation when you say that all Canadian prime ministers were harmful and cruel. I've had the rare opportunity and the privilege of knowing 8. Yes, that's 8. Maybe you're thinking, man, how old is that guy? 8 Canadian prime ministers. Some I got to know very well, some just on a first name or a handshake basis. I would say, and even looking at the policies of those, many of whom were liberal and a number were conservative, I would characterize none of the 8 prime ministers that I have had the privilege of knowing as harmful and cruel. Were they misguided at times? Did I disagree with certain of their policies? Oh yeah, absolutely. But when you say the other side of an issue, once you start to denigrate them to the point where it's almost like evil or good, that's throwing a real roadblock into the process. So hopefully Professor Sinclair can get beyond some of that characterization and move us towards truth and reconciliation. There is still pressure on Prime Minister Carney in Canada from Canadian media who say that he's abandoning all of his goals relative to what he wanted to see when he was head of the bank in England and other positions he's held. He's always had a view, very strong, what we would call climate, even a climate extremist, probably one of the leading figures in the world to penalize not just businesses, but entire countries who weren't towing the line in terms of being aggressive enough on the so-called climate problems. And since he's been in office, he's looking around, and I think he's taking a somewhat intelligent look and saying, you know what? Maybe the world isn't going to end in 3 years in a sea of overflowed oceans or deserts because of climate change. So he's modifying some of those policies. He's looked at, for instance, the electric vehicle mandate, and he said, you know what, this is just unrealistic to say that no cars after a certain year, 2035, no cars are going to be permitted to be made unless they are electric. And he's looking at what we're seeing more and more, some of the challenges with an electric vehicle mandate. No problem with allowing people, of course, to make their choices. But when you mandate it, well, you still haven't fixed the problems of battery storage and the increased numbers in rare earth mining that has to take place for these EVs, and the fact that gasoline engined vehicles are improving and have been improving all the time in terms of emissions. He's just taking a look at those and saying, you know what, maybe we've been too extreme. And mainstream media, certainly in Canada, is pounding on Prime Minister Carney. He's not being their Greta boy that they thought he would be. So interesting times as he is looking at media that used to be his friend, now not so much. They can always count on the fact, though, the Liberals can count on the fact that mainstream media do not like conservative leaders, period. We've talked about that and shown why, because conservative leaders just don't buy into the whole United Nations agenda. Mainstream media, being largely culturally Marxist, they do buy into the entire UN agenda, the globalist agenda, the elitist agenda. They buy into that. And so when they sense somebody who doesn't, they talk about cruel and harmful. Things get pretty cruel for them. So Prime Minister Carney definitely having his challenges there, and his foreign affairs minister. Prime Minister Carney was traveling to other countries. He's got a reputation now for being quite the globetrotter. He's getting around a lot. And his foreign affairs minister, speaking at the UN, was focusing in on things that Prime Minister Carney had written about in his book, like the need to share prosperity. Some of us as conservatives believe in the possibilities of creating prosperity and creating the environment and creating the circumstances where individuals can either create their own prosperity or enjoy the inventions and innovations of other creators and entrepreneurs. That's not the vision of Liberals today, either in Canada or other countries. Certainly not Mr. Carney's vision, because it was echoed by his foreign affairs minister at the UN. This is more of a socialist agenda. He's talking about that as people progress, you increasingly take too much of their hard-earned money and give too little of it to those truly in need, and they give too much of it to those who are not motivated or those who unfortunately are lazy and don't want to work hard. Now I'm going to get criticized for saying that, so I'm going to say this again carefully. Mr. Carney's agenda, and a socialist agenda, is the fact that you take too much money from hardworking people and you give too little of it to people who are truly in need, and you give too much of that money to people who are not motivated or who are just plain lazy. He's trapped in that. His Prime Minister Carney's trapped in that. So is his Foreign Affairs Minister, articulating those views at the UN. Increasingly why he keeps going down in the polls, because people largely don't buy into that agenda, that you can just take too much money from people and spread it around indiscriminately. So when we're looking at spreading the money around, in Canada, the problem we have, of course, with the U.S. and disagreement on trade and other issues, that is becoming very expensive for Canada. And people think it's all about trade when you're the next door neighbor to the U.S. and those are the only issues that count. But we know very clearly the things that drive the agenda, the Trump agenda in the U.S., are things like security. And we don't see in Canada really aggressive steps coming to dealing with repeat violent offenders who then are able to sneak across the border, who cause mayhem in other jurisdictions. The area of security on a continental basis, where the U.S., of course, worries about the Arctic, where Russia and China are always increasingly playing around. And here we don't have strong indications from the Canadian Prime Minister that he really understands that issue in terms of cooperation. We have a Canadian Prime Minister who's aggressively pursuing closer and closer relations with China, and indicating at the same time he's backing off of relations with the U.S. China, which of course is allied with Russia, that is causing mayhem and destruction in Ukraine and now threatening other parts of the EU. So you have to try and be intelligent on this. And you see in the U.S., they're concerned on the security side and who's aligning with who and the global context. And they look northward and they see Canada not doing really aggressive things on the border and really drawing closer to China, who is always threatening Taiwan. And then you see Canada making statements completely against what the U.S. is pursuing relative to Israel. And you can agree or not agree on what policies are being pursued, but on almost every policy area, you have the Prime Minister of Canada who's responding to cheerleading, again, from mainstream media, who have a visceral discontent, we'll just say that, with the U.S., and pursuing an agenda that only makes it more difficult to make any headway on trade. As a matter of fact, on trade, the vast majority of items that we trade with the U.S. are not subjected to any tariffs, but certainly some areas are. And so rather than work on these areas that I've just mentioned and on the issues that I've just mentioned, we are pouring hundreds of millions, if not billions, into propping up industries that are being hit by the U.S. trade agenda. So Mr. Prime Minister Carney and the Liberals need to pick up their game in terms of looking at the issues that really are troublesome and get to the gut of the U.S. administration. It doesn't mean we cave to those issues, but it means we take an intelligent look at how we're handling them. Otherwise, we are going to continue to pay the price. And any time a government, and I've learned this as a former Minister of Finance, any time a government just props up industries, and they'll find, we always, as politicians, we find good reasons to prop up those industries, but propping up industry with hundreds of millions, if not billions of dollars, is actually going to increase cost across the board, increase inflation, not going to result in solving the problem. So we're encouraging the Liberals to wake up on these issues and see what's really at the core of the relationship between Canada and the U.S. The interesting development that we're seeing also when it comes to how the federal Liberals are responding to domestic issues, unfortunately, they're getting a bit of a reputation of anytime there's a problem, just create another government agency. You have a problem on housing, you know what, it's too difficult to look at reducing excessive taxes, to reducing excessive regulations. It's too difficult to get tougher on municipalities who are increasingly, and over the last 2 decades, increasingly expanded their reach, not just on the tax side and the regulatory side, but on the permitting side, and really being a major factor in the causing of housing going up. So they're not addressing those type of issues. They just announce another agency, as they did with the housing problem. What do? Announce another agency to look at the problem. What about projects? What about the ability to move well-refined Canadian natural gas, to move that to areas like Europe, where they don't have to keep buying gas from Russia and funding the Ukraine war? So here you've got all these countries in the EU, and they're buying Russian gas because they can't get a hold of ours in Canada, and they're financing Putin's attacks on Ukraine. It's insanity. It doesn't make sense at all. Why does it happen? Because we actually have Canadian premiers who say there's no way any pipeline is going to go near my provincial territory. And so our beautiful liquid natural gas is locked in. It can't get to the countries around the world that are in need. We still bring in Saudi Arabian oil, which you can try and explain that one to me, but it makes no sense. So all of these policies are wrong-headed. Again, it is the federal Liberals responding way too much from media, international and national media, that takes an extremely culturally Marxist point of view and always leads to solutions that are more expensive, reducing of freedoms, and wind up truly hurting everybody. So these situations are not being dealt with. You don't deal with problems just by creating giant new agencies, but that seems to be the pattern of the Liberals. And that's another reason why in Canada, the Conservative Party and Pierre Poilievre are continuing to gain in the polls, because people see through these policies, these Liberal policies that just don't work. In the U.S., interesting revelations, I guess you would call it, with Hillary Clinton in her interview today and yesterday being broadcast. She says the problem is, and I'm just using her words, problem is white men of a certain religion. So it's white men, I guess that's me, of a certain religion. She won't name the religion, but we kind of are guessing what it is. It's not Islam. That's not the religion that she's talking about. It's not Buddhism. That's not what she's talking about. She's referencing the fact that white men who profess to be Christian are really the problem, and that's where all the issues of society are. So does she include her husband, Bill Clinton, who is a white man and professes to be a Christian? Is he the problem? Were it his policies that have brought so much damage and inflation and division? Was it John F. Kennedy? Was it he's a white man, professed to be a Christian? How about Joe Biden? He's a white man and professes to be a Christian. She couldn't be talking about Barack Obama. Obama, obviously, he's not white, but he does profess to be a Christian. So just what is Hillary Clinton's problem? Is it white, like her husband? Is that what her problem is? She's got a problem just with white men? Is it the Christian religion, but all the ones I've just named profess to be Christians? Need a little more detail, but it's interesting when you have the Liberals, like the Democrats, always talking about we need more unity, and we're far too divisive. They continue to come out with these statements that are hugely divisive and wind up hurting at least, or offending at least, half of the country. And let's close, we usually close the broadcast on a cultural note. So a little different today. Kamala Harris has got her book out, talking about the number of days that she served in terms of running as the presidential candidate. So talk about the effects of culture. I appreciate her honesty in her book. You can remember all of a sudden in one part of her campaign, she was called brat, giving this sense of somebody, wow, who's kind of aggressive, kind of a bit off the cuff, and kind of doing life her way. And she says very clearly, and of course it was known at the time, that she adopted that slogan from a well-known singer, and you can, Charlie calls herself XCM. That was her brand name on Twitter or on X. and quite the singer, very well accepted by large parts of the population. Her albums sell very well, and she one day just sort of spat out. She said, "Kamala Harris is brat." That was actually happened to be the name of Charlie's album, one of her very successful albums. So nice tie in there with culture and politics. And Kamala Harris tells us about how her team just grabbed that, and instantly they went with brat. So her entire campaign, she was promoting the album cover, Charlie's album cover, and going with this sense of brat. So culture really affects the political. And we've often said that politics is actually downstream of culture. You have culture first, and then that affects political thinking. And Kamala went on to say that one of the people helping her in terms of her image and adopting her image was the same person, Greta Gerwig, if I pronounced that, Gerwig, sorry, if I pronounced that correctly, who of course was responsible for and director of the Barbie movie. So here you got the director of Barbie actually working, spending a lot of time with Kamala on her speeches. And Kamala even talked about how her, and she said this in kind of a negative way, how her PR team would work with her, like on her convention speech, showing her where to make, this is her words, not mine, I'm not making this up, how to make the sound of certain grunts or certain hum sounds, certain rolling of the eyes. So we have Kamala being very transparent and honest that she was a product of the culture and maybe leaned a little too closely to culture. But then when it all went wrong, she seems to be blaming her team a lot. You know, there's times when a team makes mistakes and can give wrong advice. That can happen, but you've got to be careful about not blaming them. I know that as a leader and leader of the Canadian opposition, times when things don't go well, you can make a comment or be upset, and it can be the team's fault, but you've got to just, as we say, suck it up and keep on going. So there's some good thoughts on how the culture actually does affect politics, and it affects you and me. And thanks for tuning in today. We'll see you and hear you tomorrow. Thank you.